cd my namespace. That'll get us into the solution folder, and then we're going to go cd my namespace to get into the project folder. Then we're going to go cd bin to get into the bin directory, and then I think there's a debug directory, right? So we'll go cd debug, and then I'm going to do a dir, and you can see all of the files that are currently there. We'll come back to that in just a moment. What we'll do here now is actually do dim arguments equals my.application, and here we can get at things like the culture, the UI culture, info. I'm not sure what you can get from info. Oh, okay. Oh, info about this application. Right. Okay, I get it. And more importantly, though, I want to look at the command line arguments that are going to be passed in, and then we'll go for eaching our way through each item in the arguments, and we'll just do a console write line to show that we can actually retrieve them out and display them on screen. But ideally here we would do some logic inside of our application and change the functionality based on the arguments that are being passed in. So let's go ahead and just run the application once to compile it. So that will get it compiled, but now I can open up here and just go my namespace.exe, and then I'll just do A, B, C, and D. Notice that I use different capitalization, and it actually prints out each of those to a different line using console.writeLine. Very cool. Now, if I didn't want to go to all this work inside of the command prompt window to navigate into the project directory, I could use a special feature inside of Visual Studio that allows me to adjust the properties of my project. So I'm going to right-click on the project name in the Solution Explorer and select the Properties option. And here we're going to go to the Debug tab on the left-hand side and type in our arguments. I think we already did A, B, C, D. Let's go E, F, G, H, and I. All right, so we're giving it 5 more command line arguments. We'll save this and then rerun our application. And this time you can see that it gives lowercase e, uppercase f, lowercase g, uppercase I, h, and then lowercase I. And we can basically test our command line arguments right here from inside of Visual Studio. So just so you know. All right, let's comment all this out. So that's another very cool little thing we can do with the my namespace. Let's move on and talk about one other thing. Let's stay in that properties editor and go to let's go to settings. So here we have this little grid where we can actually add settings that we can write to and retrieve between runs of our application. So we might want to save the user settings, what their preferences are in this app config file. And we could write and open up that app config file and look at the XML ourselves where it stores all these values. But this is a much nicer editor that we can work in. So I might want to store something like first value and set that equal to Bob. And then go second value and set that equal to like Conrad, right? So now we have 2 strings that are stored in our app config, and I can retrieve them out and use them inside of my application using the my.settings.firstValue. Notice that it automatically creates a property called first value and creates one called second value automatically because we created those keys inside of our settings tab of our properties. So let's go, let's do this, console.writeLine, and we'll do a before, and here I'm going to just print out my.settings.firstValue, and then my.settings.secondValue. And then I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll have a little fun here. Let's grab this. Let's make a change to it. We'll set first value equal to Beth instead of Bob. And then we'll set the second value equal to Grant instead of Conrad. And then we'll save those changes And then we'll go ahead and print this out again, except this time we'll do after. And let's just grab this and just add an empty line there. All right, so this should be interesting. I'll go ahead and get rid of that too, or actually let's just comment it out. Okay. All right, a lot of typing here, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to open up and grab the current values inside of the app config, and then I'm going to change the values and save them and then display what the new settings are here in my console window application. And you can see, whoops, we get the before and the after as the same. I wonder why that happened. And let me try this. Let's try to reset our settings here, and let's go ahead and run it now. All right, there we go. Now we got what we needed. All right, very cool. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. But as you can see, there's a lot of things that you can do with the My namespace. There's even more. I'll let you go ahead and explore it and learn more on your own. But at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next topic. If you're still with me, you're doing great. Keep pushing through. We're so far along at this point. We're just tacking on other great information to make your applications even richer, and we'll do that. Continue that process in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. Previously, I said that the creator of the console window project template, whenever we go File, New Project, and we select console application or console window project, it added references to the parts of the .NET Framework class library that we might find useful. However, if there was a need for some class that didn't reside in the assemblies that were by default referenced in our project template, then we could add a reference to it ourselves. And the way that we would do that, and you can see I just have a little throwaway application that I'm calling typical console application. The way that you can do that is to select the references node inside of the Solution Explorer, right-click and select Add Reference, and that'll pop up the Reference Manager. And you'll see that there are a number of different categories here. We'll choose Assemblies and Framework. And here you can see all of the assemblies that are part of the .NET Framework class library. You can see some of them already have little check marks next to them indicating that we already have references to those. Now, many of these, I don't know that anybody has used them all. There's just so many of them, and you only choose the ones that you need for your specific application. Some of them are specific to types of application, whether it be a Windows or a web application. Some of them deal specifically with data, accessing data from a database or accessing data in the cloud. Some of them have to do with just security. Some of them have to deal with I mean, there's just everything you can possibly think of. It's going to be represented here in one of these. So if I needed one of these, what I could do is just find it. For example, system.data.link. I might want it to create or maybe SQL XML. I want to work with XML and save it in a SQL database. I might then add that reference by clicking the checkbox next to it and then selecting the OK button, and now it's added that reference to my application. I can use all of the classes and namespaces inside of that if I need it. Now, if I wind up not needing it, I don't have to worry about removing the reference. This is really just a convenience for compilation. The .NET compiler, the Visual Basic compiler, is smart enough to know that we really didn't need a reference to that particular assembly, and we didn't use any of the namespaces or the classes inside of that assembly, so it'll safely ignore it on its own. All right. Now, that's one way that we can get those additional libraries that were created by Microsoft for specific purposes into our application. But there's also a wealth of free open source libraries that are created by third-party companies and teams of individuals that provide many common features that we might want to add to our application. And so the repository for those open source projects is NuGet. And what we can do is go to Tools and go to the NuGet Package Manager. And while we could use the Manager console, I recommend that you, starting out, use the Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. This will open up a visual editor. And what we can do is browse for a specific type of library. Perhaps we know the name of the library that we want to use. Let's say I want to add some logging capabilities to my application. I might choose this Log4Net, and there's a bunch of different ones, but I might select it and then say, oh yeah, I want to add that to this project, this typical console application, and I want to install the latest stable version of it, but there are some other options that I could choose from down here. I'm just going to go ahead and click install, and now it's going to grab down all of the assemblies and references to other dependencies that I would need in order to use that Log4Net library of functionality inside of my application. So I just wanted to show you how to use it. We won't be using Log4Net, but you can see that it's now been added to as a reference inside of my project. It's also copied down some of those library files into the actual project. Here, let me find it real quick. Look for typical console application, and here you can see that there's a packages folder where we have the Log4Net, and there's a bunch of different versions of it. And then when we go to actually utilize it and compile it in our application, it'll show up in our debug directory as well. At this point, we haven't added any references to the DLL, so there's no need for the compiler to copy the library over into our debug folder. So at this point, we don't even we don't see it. But I just wanted to make you aware of the NuGet Package Manager. But then there's a third scenario where we might want to create our own library of code to reuse within our own company or within the projects that we work on individually. Maybe we could even open source them and distribute them to others through NuGet at some point. So what I want to do is create a code library. We haven't done that up to this point. And I want to use some of that logic from 2 lessons ago where we were actually able to go out online, grab all the HTML off of my website. And what I also want to do is not only display it in a console window, but also save it into a text file. And we'll call that something like scrape web page. All right. So what I'm going to do is create first of all, a new project, and this time I'm not going to choose console application. Instead, I'm going to choose class library, and we'll call this class library my code library. All right, something very generic. We'll click OK, and yeah, we can save off the changes we made there. Okay, as you can see, this code library only has a class. I could rename this class something like, oh, I don't know, my class. Again, very generic. And here what I'm going to do is create a public function scrape web page as string. All right. It doesn't like the name my class. Let's call it the scrape class. And so then we'll create a scrape web page function. And here what I'm going to do is just start off by using the web client. So we'll go a dim client as new web client. Of course, it won't be able to find it. I'm going to hit Control period on my keyboard to import the system.net namespace. And the next thing I'll do is go dim reply as string equal to client.download string, and we're going to pass in something into the scrape web page function. So we'll go by val, let's go URL as string, So we'll pass that URL into the download string. That should work. And next we're going to do a, I guess we won't do the console.writeLine. We'll just return the string, or actually reply. There we go. And the next thing we're going to do is also go file dot write all text. I happen to know that that's what I need from the system.io namespace. So we're going to import system.io. So write all text, and then we're going to give it a path. So I'll just go ahead and pass in a path. That'll be the second item that we're going to need to pass in by val path as string. All right, and so let's go ahead and pop those on different lines. And I have to also give it what I want to write. So in this case, we'll write the reply, and then we'll return the reply. So hopefully that will work. Let's go ahead and build the solution. And what I'm going to do is change this from the debug to the release version. So the debug version creates extra code that allows Visual Studio to attach to it. The release version is when I'm finished with my code and I may want to distribute it and use it in other projects, or actually put it on somebody else's computer. So I go ahead and select the release configuration, and then I'm going to choose build solution, and it should build into the release, the /bin/release folder, my code library.dll, as you can see here, and it looks like it succeeded. So what we'll do now is actually create a new project to utilize that class library, and I'm going to call this my client and click OK. And here what we're going to do is actually add a reference to that DLL that I just created. So there's a couple of different ways to do it. I'm actually going to right click and select add reference again, and this time what I want to do is just use the browse feature, and you can see that it found that I currently have this DLL in my users Bob documents Visual Studio 2015 projects, my code library, and so on, because it's under the recent DLLs that I created. But if it wasn't, I'd have to use the browse feature, and I'd have to go and search using this open dialog to find that DLL somewhere on my hard drive, and that's not going to be as pleasant. There's a lot of friction in that experience. This time, just for the sake of illustration, I'll go ahead and use this recent item, but I probably would have to use the browse in order to find that DLL on my hard drive. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to need to create an instance of scrape. So dim my scrape as new scrape, and it doesn't see scrape in the IntelliSense. So clearly I did something, you know what I need to do? Control period. And I need to import the my code library namespace into my module1.vb. Why? Because the default name for my namespace is the name of the project. So I need to import the namespace for the code library I created that contains the scrape class, and then it will be able to see it. All right. So now I have a reference to my scrape, and I should be able to do like dim result as string equals my scrape dot scrape web page. There we go. And let's give it a URL and then a path where we want to save the file. So the URL will be http://www.devview.com, and then we'll use for the path C:// I think I have an example folder where I've been saving some things, example devview.txt, and that result will come back. I'll do a console.writeLine just to show that we can actually get that string back, and I'll do a console.readLine, and now I have hopefully successfully used the code library that I created in the previous step. So let's go ahead and run the application. Whoa, we got a problem. There's a syntax error where, let's go ahead and add an underscore there. Probably should have done it like this instead. And then we'll add that there. Okay, let's try and run it now. There we go. All right, so we grabbed all the text pretty quick. I'll go ahead and hit enter to finish that. And now let's take a look at the example folder. There should be a devu.txt, and there is, and it has my entire web page. So that's how you can create a library with functionality to scrape web pages off the internet and waste everybody's bandwidth. But at any rate, you can see that it was made pretty easy by the fact that we were able to add a recent item. But what I'd like to do is actually recreate this project really quickly and just show you how to create this project. So we're going to call this the scrape, web scrape, I'll call it. Web scrape, and click OK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow this web scrape project to be the console window application, and then I'm going to add another project to it. So I'm going to go to File, Add a new project, and I'm going to create a class library, which I'm going to call my code library. All right, it should put it in the web scrape folder. And here we go. I'm going to call this scrape. And here we'll go public function scrape web page as string. And I tell you what we're going to do. I'm just going to pause the video, copy and paste the code in here from the previous project. So let's go ahead and pause the video now. All right, so you can see that I've got two projects. The code library project will have a class called scrape with my scrape web page functionality in it. And I have a second project that will actually be the consumer of that code library. And here we'll go and utilize it by going, let's go scrape, and I'm going to hit Control period on my keyboard, and it doesn't see it. Well, what we need to do, as you can see, is use one of the options near the bottom, import my code library from my code library. All right. And so that will fix the issue, and it created a reference all in one shot. You can see it added the reference here as well. Very cool. All because it's right inside of the same solution. So let's go and do a dim my scrape equals new scrape, and then we'll go dim result as string equals my scrape dot scrape web page. Here we'll pass in the URL like we did before. Let's do let's grab something different like Microsoft.com, and then we'll save it here c:/example/Microsoft.txt, and then we will go console.writeLine, passing in result, and then console.readLine, like so. And now let's run the application. And we're able to get back the Microsoft homepage. And if we were to navigate over to our example folder, we have a Microsoft.txt that has the web page in it. Great. Okay, so like I said, in larger projects, it's likely that you want to keep multiple projects into the same solution when they're somehow related. Here we've split up the functionality and created a shared code library, but we were able to access it then from another project whose purpose is to actually do the to call into that code library and then to actually show stuff on screen, save it to a hard drive, all that kind of stuff. But this is the exact scenario where using multiple projects inside of a single solution makes sense. So to recap, in this lesson, we talked about how to create a reference to other parts of the .NET Framework class library if they're not already added in by default, depending on the project template that you've selected. We talked about how to reference other free and open source assemblies that are created by other companies, a group of developers, or even Microsoft has some of their libraries out there on NuGet as well. We looked at how to create our own code library, which we did that for the first time, and then how to access it from our app. And then we looked at a second version of that where we actually created a solution containing both the client and the library in the same solution right here. And we were able to easily make a reference from the client to the code library in just one step by hitting Control period on our keyboard, that quick access step that we got from IntelliSense, and it did everything for us in one shot. It was very convenient. Okay, so hopefully that's insightful, and that helps you to understand how developers really work with splitting out the responsibilities of their application into multiple files for reusability's sake, for maintenance sake, and then also for distribution through other channels like NuGet or whatever the case might be. All right, so hopefully that helps, and we'll continue on and talk about collections in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. So previously we looked at arrays, which allowed us to keep a sequence or a group of related values all packaged together in the same container, in the same bucket, the analogy I've been using up to this point, the same bucket in the computer's memory. And we created an array by first defining the data type and then the number of items that we hope to store in the array surrounded with parentheses. So if I wanted 5 items, I would do dim something and then use parentheses 4 as string, and I would be creating an array of strings in that case. And then once we had the data gathered together inside of an array, then we could iterate through the array and perform other operations on all the items in the array, kind of together as a group. But you recall that I said that once I introduced collections, you would see that they were arrays on steroids, and I almost exclusively use collections over arrays unless I absolutely have to. And I think you'll agree that collections are great whenever you're working with all data types, not just simple data types like your strings and integers, but then also with custom classes like the car class that we've been building ourselves. So the .NET Framework class library will use both arrays and collections depending on what it's trying to do, but you're often going to prefer to use collections because of some of the rich filtering, sorting, and aggregation features that it provides through a feature called LINQ, which stands for Language Integrated Query, which is an innovative feature that was added some years ago to Visual Basic and C# for basically this very purpose. If you're familiar with SQL, the structured query language, then it's going to look a lot like that, or at least it was structured to look like that. And we'll dive into LINQ in the next lesson. But there are essentially a couple of different collections that we want to take a look at in this lesson. We're going to look at lists and dictionaries. And there's probably a dozen additional types of collections we could look at. Each of them have their own superpowers. They're used for very specific situations. However, I personally feel like if you were to understand lists and dictionaries, you'll use them about 95% of the time. So I'm going to introduce these to you, and then you can go off and learn about the other specialized lists and collections that you can use on your own. So suppose that I have a number of cars on my car lot, and I want to work with all of that data, all of the car objects collectively as a group, as opposed to just storing the data about each one of the objects individually. So to get this set up, what I want to do is actually point you to the code that's associated with this lesson. There will be a before folder, and I want you to copy out the understanding collections as a starting point. And if you're going to follow along, let's go to the projects folder and paste that baby in. And now we can open up that project, and we'll both be in the